that snake around, just having the best time.
I love my dog. She's like my child.
Well, it's gonna be perfect timing.
Montrose, we're live.
6 o'clock, we're live.
We are live. I see it on the top of the screen.
We are live.
All right,
To
we're going to
go.
call this meeting. This work session.
All right.
We're going to call the work session to order. Dr. Michael, can you put a copy of the agenda up on the thing?
Certainly can. Just here we go. We're good to go.
All right. So it looks like next Tuesday, Lisa, you're going to have the invocation,
Okay.
and of course we'll need to approve the minutes and the agenda, and then really won't have any committee reports per se. And I don't think we've got any requests to appear before the board. So moving right along, tonight we'll go ahead and get started with support services. And Dr. Green, have you got some information for us?
Ken still on there?
Ken, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. I didn't remember to unmute. The
Yep.
communications report, the support services report are there for your review. I have nothing really to add to that particular report unless you have questions.
Does anybody have any questions?
Is that where they're talking about, is that the communications?
Yes.
I had no questions. I just had a comment that we saw a bunch of increase in, was it Twitter or
Facebook, I think.
Facebook? Okay, maybe it was Facebook. It went crazy, but since the coronavirus, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Twitter was up too.
Yeah, it's crazy. And the numbers went up to like over 400,000.
Mhm.
I don't have it in front of me, but it was
Well, it
pretty-
appeared like everything was up.
Yeah.
Well, this may be a good thing too, because when school starts back up, people will be used to going on, checking things and using the system more.
Yeah.
So that,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, not a bad thing.
My,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was commenting on what you said. I think you're right.
Oh, okay. So Dr. Green, is that it for you?
That's it for the support services. Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. Is Jennifer with us?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
All
Okay.
right, Jennifer, tell us what you've been up to.
Which one do you want?
We're going to do the invoices real quick, get that out of the way. The first one, and then the only one, is to Bone Dry Roofing Company. This is for a field house. The field house roof had hail damage on it, and so the insurance company came out, and it cost a total of $74,850, but the insurance covered the majority of it. So we had to pay $22,100 to get that done, and that was out at Winder Barrow High School.
Now, I had a question on that. Why did they not cover the full thing?
It's our deductible.
That's our deductible. Okay.
Jennifer, did we get quotes on that or how did that work?
Joe?
Sure.
I mean, a total was $74,000, but we only paid 22. So I just wondered if we got quotes on that.
We met with the insurance company on site, Dr. Huff, and they just requested that we get a quote from a certified roofer, that would have to be certified to put down that particular product. And so we did that. They were satisfied with the company and the material chosen, and multiple quotes really would not have benefited us because we're going to reach that deductible in any event.
Okay. I just wondered how that worked, if you looked into more than one organization. Have we ever used this Bone Dry people before?
We have, yeah, they've done work for us before, and they're a
All right,
good company.
I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
if I may interject here, I know these folks Bone Dry, and they're probably maybe the best in the area, I think, anyway.
They're good.
Okay, good. Never heard of them.
I'm gonna make a comment. They ought to be for $72,000 for
Yeah,
a
what'd they
field
do?
house.
24,000.
Is that some sort of film they put up there? Some sort of? It's
There
not
were,
sheet-
there are multiple layers of roof that they had to remove. So that was part of the reason for the cost, kind of being elevated like that. And then they went back with, it's what we've used here on our last several projects. It looks like a white sheet
Yeah.
that goes over the top of that, but it's very durable, very maintenance friendly, and comes with the 20-year warranty. So it's a good product.
It's like a film, almost like a thick film, isn't it, Joe?
It's a thick rubber type material, and they weld those seams together. They heat weld those seams together. So it's very durable.
Did that for the longest summer of my life.
Flat roofs like that are,
As
those
a
are very
roofer,
expensive
Sure did.
to maintain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
flat roofs are horrible. Yeah.
What
And
has been,
it's got pitch to it. I mean, it's not much, but it has enough to get the water off of it.
what has been the standard on that? Even if we use insurance to pay for something, have we not normally gone to get bids out? Because if there's 74,850, somebody else may have been, to get costs and stuff. We do that on everything else.
Yeah.
I just don't understand that $74,000.
Well, that was the insurance company's call. I mean, it would have benefited them to have multiple quotes out there because they're paying the balance. We were going to pay that deductible no matter what. Now, if we were close, and the total project cost was going to be $24,000, then yes, if it was $10,000, we'd be getting 3 quotes.
Right.
But, they were comfortable with the company we chose, and so they're paying the lion's share of that.
Yeah, Joe, I think Joe's right. In my experience with having roof damage on several structures around here, the insurance company drives that whole process, and you just sit back and let them do it.
Right.
And 2, if we get into a bid situation and we get someone that's lower, that doesn't mean they're better. We felt like we had a reputable company there, and they'd stand behind their work, and so those
They
went
out of
into the.
Winder, Joe.
They're actually in Bogart.
Athens, chamber member at one time.
Hey, all right.
Yeah, and
They're a
I've
good
seen-
company. They're
And
a
I've
good
seen
company.
them
Okay.
at school board conferencing too, our school board conferences. I've seen them with a booth, so they're a good company.
Okay.
Okay.
And they have done work for us before, Beverly. It's all been very satisfactory, so.
Okay.
Okay, any
Chad-
other questions about that?
If they give you any problems, let me know. I know Chad personally. I'll go get him. Joe,
Yes, sir.
how old is that building?
Oh, goodness.
Really?
Yeah.
Almost 20 years
That's-
old.
Pushing 20, isn't it?
The old
Yeah.
field house? I think the
Was
old
this-
field house has been there for longer than that.
Oh,
Yeah.
This is the field house, right?
This is the old field house. The Phil Jones, I guess, was here when that was
Yeah.
maybe put in place. So it's probably
Went
closer
down
to
the
30
hole.
years or
The
more.
old
Oh,
field
it
house was
predates-
there when I went to high school in 1996. That's all
Yeah.
I can tell you.
Yeah.
And it had been there for a while, I think, at that
Yeah,
point.
it predates Phil Jones.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's
Oh, wow.
All
Okay.
right, we'll move on to the budget timeline now. We don't have a budget timeline, basically. Which we did. Normally by now, we would have had our preliminary budget ready for you guys. We would have already had our budget education meeting that was planned, but COVID happened on March 13th, and so that kind of stopped everything for us. We have to wait on our allotment sheets from the state before we can make some big decisions. Sometimes some mandated salary increases come from them. And so we kind of have to wait to see what the state tells us to do for us to be able to finish our budget, and also how much money they're going to give us to see if we can fund our budget needs. So what we're doing is we're hoping that projection will come out in June, and we are going to have to do a spending resolution. That's what most districts are going to be doing, or I believe all districts in Georgia will probably have to do a spending resolution because we won't have the information ready for you guys to
Everyone
vote.
I've talked to is.
Yeah. And we also have to have public hearings. We have no guidance yet on how we're supposed to be public hearings. So it's going to be a long process. But a spending resolution allows us to spend 1/12 of our previous year's budget for that 1 month, and to do another one for August if we don't get the budget approved by July 31st. So we're just gonna I'm just gonna keep you updated every meeting, every work session, just tell you where we're at. We also have to approve a millage rate, and that's going to be difficult also, but I'm in constant contact with the county, and we will just do our best there. We're going to have public hearings for that also. And again, we don't have any guidance on how that's supposed to look, but the county knows, and they're working with us on that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anything else? Is that it?
Nothing else. Any questions?
So Jennifer, the spending resolution will be June 16th.
Yes, that's our last meeting in June. So we have to have a spending resolution by June 30th to be able to conduct business in July.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Moving right along. Let's see. We next have Joe Perno.
Okay, we've got our sort of standard update there with the new high school, and we're hitting our marks there. We're on track, and so we continue to feel good about our schedule and being all prepared to open up here. So things are coming along well.
Great.
Looks great.
Ooh, I love that.
Boy,
Nice.
that's pretty.
Gym pops.
Does. It looks great.
That's awesome.
I like the Blazers too. The name. I
Yeah,
think
that's
great.
cool.
Good choice. That whole building pops. I like the carpet and everything. It's good.
Yeah, it's sharp. It's definitely going to be a show place.
Yeah, it looks like a college facility.
Right.
Yeah, can't wait for y'all to get in there and take a look around in person. It's even better that way.
Definitely.
Yep, that's it for
There
my
you go.
report, unless there's any questions.
Okay. Anybody have any questions?
Now, don't
Okay. Then we'll go to Dr. Moten.
I don't believe she or Miss Beggs have anything
Okay.
lined up tonight.
All right. Then we'll move on down to new business. Looks like John St. Clair is gonna get some more Chromebooks. There's John.
Here I am.
Okay.
The superintendent recommends authorizing the purchase of Chromebooks from low bidder respondent Ari Jones of Atlanta in the amount of $214.19 per Chromebook. In the interest of the meeting format, I won't go through my usual routine of reading it all, but the summary is the low bidder respondent has done similar business with us before successfully. We're not actually purchasing any at this time with this bid. We're asking for permission to assign this vendor as our vendor of choice for purchasing for the next 6 months up to $100,000 worth before we have to come back to the board. The reason we're doing this is similar to the way we do computer purchases, is there is an 8 to 10 week lead time on buying Chromebooks. So by the time a need is identified and we bring it to you, we could be looking as much as 2 months plus before we can actually get them. So we're trying to get the blessing ahead of time using this low bid respondent. Of course, we'll do the standard routine of reporting to the board of any purchases so required.
Is it all right to put?
John, if
Go
my
ahead, I'm
math
sorry.
works, that allows you about 466 of those.
Yeah, thereabouts, yes.
Okay, all right. You got any idea about what kind of need we're gonna have?
I don't. And
Okay.
so
That's good enough. Good enough.
yeah, okay.
So is it okay to put this on the consent agenda? Does anybody oppose putting this on the consent agenda? Let's do it that way. Okay, then it'll be on the consent agenda.
Hey, John, it's interesting that you had 38 responses. That's more than I recall ever seeing.
I have never seen that many responses before, and honestly, I'm hoping to only see about half that next time.
Is that driven? Are they all in trouble? I mean, are these companies desperate?
I think everybody's hungry. I do.
Yeah. Well, that helps us out, but I guess, I mean, are these good prices, better prices than we paid for Chromebooks in the past?
These are on par with what we've paid in the past, and honestly, with supply chain issues, I was expecting the prices to go up, and I was pleasantly surprised that we got the price we did.
Great.
Very good.
Okay, next we got the Appalachia High School cabling,
Yes, ma'am.
data cabling.
The superintendent recommends awarding the bid for data cabling for Appalachia High School to low bid respondent Tech Optics in the amount of $111,887.79, and also authorizing an additional $25,000 in funding for any moves, adds, and changes that come up during construction. We did our usual process of putting out an open RFP. We had the 7 responses we received. Of course, Tech Optics has done similar business with us successfully before.
Okay. Anybody
John.
have any?
John, this PowerLinks technology, are they new to the game with us?
I've not seen them before that I can recall. They are, as near as I can tell, have been doing business like this for about 2 years now.
Okay, I just see they're also in Winder. I don't
Yeah,
know.
they were new to me.
Debbie, do you know who they are?
No, I don't,
Hmm.
but I'll check on it tomorrow.
Well, that's interesting. I've never heard of them.
Neither have I.
Okay. Any other questions about this particular item? Does anybody oppose putting this on the consent agenda?
No.
Okay. All right, that'll go on the consent agenda also.
Am I on? Okay. The next one is the Statham data cabling. Same as Appalachia doing renovations this summer. The superintendent recommends awarding the bid for network data cabling at Statham to Tech Optics of Winder, Georgia, in the amount of $48,193.11, and to also authorize an additional $20,000 for any moves, adds, and changes that come up. You'll note that they were not the low bid by a few thousand, by $3,000. PowerLink did not submit a complete proposal. There were multiple components that were missing in their response. And so the decision was to offer it to Tech Optics, who did meet the complete terms of the RFP. And of course, has done successful business with us before.
Okay.
Any questions?
If PowerLink had submitted a correct proposal, would they have been a lot more expensive than Tech Optics?
Obviously.
I don't know how to answer that, sir.
Okay. Okay.
I see a lot of money or a lot of things down here for possible changes.
Yes, because of the quarantine and not having our usual ability to have all the face-to-face meetings we might normally have, we anticipated that there might be more moves, adds, and changes than usual. And so rather than letting a vendor have a blank check, I locked them down at some pricing for the most common types of issues we might add, so that if I do get a change order, I'm going to hold them to the pricing that they put on the on their response. For those
Makes sense.
components.
Yep.
Thank you.
I worry about companies that can't read directions on bids, so.
All the other responses were complete per the specs of the RFP.
Okay. Anybody object to putting this on the consent agenda? Hearing none, that'll go on the consent agenda. Okay. Next. Network switches.
Yes, ma'am. The superintendent recommends awarding the purchase of network switches for multiple schools to authorized low bid respondent MXN of Woodstock, Georgia, in the amount of $207,843, and to authorize the use of this RFP for future purchases for the next 3 months, subject to normal board requirements for reporting and approval. The language on the recommendation is specific about authorized low bid respondents. If you will recall, roughly a year ago, we had a low bid respondent offer us switches that it turned out they weren't actually authorized to sell us. And we had to come back to you to ask permission to switch vendors. And it was actually a significant ordeal behind the scenes. This time, the 2 low bid respondents, we contacted HP directly and asked them if the products they were offering us were legitimately sourced through their sales chains. Specifically, what that offers us is, will they warranty the product or will they not? And HP responded back that Data Connect and Maller both were not selling us authorized technology through authorized sales chains and would not authorize the warranty, and that the low bid respondent who was authorized was MXN. This is probably indicating that they sourced it through gray market or over in Europe or some other source.
That might explain the difference in the pricing too.
Yeah.
All right. Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have a problem with putting this on the consent agenda? Hearing none, then we'll put this on the consent agenda also. Thank you, John. Okay.
Thank you.
And that looks like we've got Dr. Green talking about a temporary waiver of policy
Yes, ma'am.
IHA grading systems.
Yes, ma'am. I've been paying a close attention to our policies to make sure that during this time of pandemic that we are following our policies, or if there are any that we need to waive to give us the flexibility that we need to, that we will come to you with that information. The only policy that we had that looked like it might need to be temporarily waived is this particular policy. And so the superintendent is recommending temporarily waiving policy IHA grading systems until July 31st of 2020. That gets us through the end of the school year. There's some specific language in that policy related to some standardized testing from the state and some other very particular ways that we report grades and those kinds of things. And we just felt like it would give us the flexibility that we need to be able to finish this year and to provide feedback to parents about how their students are doing. If we can temporarily waive this policy, if you choose to do this, that on August 1st, which is before next year's school year starts, the policy would be back in effect and we'd be back to normal by that time.
Okay, and this fits in with the guidelines that we got from the state, right, about what we could do.
Yes,
I think I even read about that. Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody have any problems, any questions about this? Does anybody object to this being put on the consent agenda?
Nope.
Hearing none, we will put that on there.
All right.
Okay. Next, oh, fun, transportation proposal.
Settle in.
I always enjoy being introduced that way, Ms. Stevens.
Settle in.
Okay, so tonight I'm going to walk you through a few possible transportation scenarios for next year. Ultimately, what I'm going to ask you to do, or ask the superintendent to do tonight, is for you to place, or at the regular meeting coming up next Tuesday, is to place 2 scenarios on the table for public review. So I'll walk you through a little bit of the history of how we got here. Then I'll go into some additional details about the scenarios that we have, and then I'll answer any questions that you might have. So if you'll remember, on November the 19th, I made a presentation about our need to engage the services of a transportation consultant to assist us in evaluating options for addressing the complicated logistics of meeting the challenges of a growing system with innovative off-site programs such as Sims Academy, the Arts Integration Magnet known as AIM at CFIT, while also opening a 3rd high school which would provide choice option for students across Barrow County. And at that time, we engaged the services of school bus logistics. Now, leading up to that, we had a committee that was made up of school administrator representatives from all three levels, elementary, middle, and high. We had representatives from BASA, and from our transportation department and a couple of district office folks that had been meeting to gather some information relative to current issues within transportation, some foundational information, and to set goals to work together. And on November 19th, we presented to you that there were three big questions that were in need of answers. First is, how can we best meet transportation needs of students given our continued growth as a system, particularly at the middle and high school levels? How do we protect instruction time for programs requiring shuttles? For example, SIMS, AIM at CFED, and our newly soon to be open Barrow Arts and Sciences Academy. And how do we protect teacher planning time, especially at the elementary school level? So we engaged the services of school bus logistics to run some scenarios for us that the committee could consider to see what might be our best option. So the consultant developed 6 scenarios for committee review. After reviewing those 6 scenarios, the committee came up with 4 additional scenarios, which were basically modifications on 2 of the most workable of the 6 scenarios that the consultant came up with. So that gave us 10 total scenarios that the committee spent a good bit of time these last few weeks in reviewing. As you might imagine, there's no single scenario of those 10 that meets all of the goals that we set for ourselves. We knew going in that there would be some competing demands, that by meeting one, it would be difficult to meet another. So we finished our work at this point with 2 potentially workable solutions that I want to go into some depth with you tonight as ones that we would like to consider, that we'd like to put on the table for public review so that we can get input from our teachers and students and families to see what their thoughts are on each of these 2 scenarios. Before I discuss the scenarios, though, I want to briefly show you school start and end times for some of the school systems around us, and also in regions where we compete. And so that's the document that Dr. McMichael has pulled up for you there, just to kind of let you see what's there. These should include most of the systems around us, as well as some systems that are a little further away, but they're systems that we compete against in competition, including single A schools, which would be the region for BASA and any competition that they would have, to just kind of see how those schools are arranged. So we looked at 14, and they're here for comparison. Of those 14 systems, 9 had elementary schools starting first. 4 had high schools starting first, and then 1 was a very small system, Towns County, that has everybody starting at the same time. So neither system started first. One comment that I would like to make, if you'll notice Jackson County, which is towards the bottom of the first page, they currently have elementary schools starting first, followed pretty closely behind with middle school, well, actually high school and then middle school. We've recently seen postings on social media that they're actually going to flip that for next year. So they're going to go to high school starting first next year, followed by middle and elementary. So I wanted you to just know that that change is coming, because this particular document represents the current situation, but we've already received word that Jackson County will be flipping next year. I can, talk a little bit more about the school start times. The early start time for elementary was 7:40. The latest start time for elementary among these 14 schools is 8:55. Middle schools had times in the morning that ranged from 7:30 to 9 o'clock as a start time. And high schools had the widest range of start times. One system started as early as 7:15. There were others that started as late as 8:45. The last comment that I'll make about these start times is that the end times, combining all of the schools together, ranged anywhere from 2:10 to 4:15 across all levels. So the latest elementary end time among these 14 schools was 3:20, and the latest high school end time was 3:35. So just kind of keep that in mind, refer back to that document as you'd like as we go through the next set of scenarios. So Dr. McMichael, if you'll close that one and pull up the other attachment. So for the purposes of this discussion tonight, I've provided you with a document that contains both the goals of the committee as well as 4 scenarios total. And I'll walk you through why 4 instead of just the 2 we'd like for you to put on the table as we go through. So the primary goals that we had for this process was to get BASA students to school on a schedule that aligns with the traditional high school day so that we could continue to utilize SIMS for both the traditional high school and for BASA without significantly shortening the BASA day and having significantly fewer minutes in that day. The second set of goals relate primarily to elementary schools, and we wanted to shorten the day for elementary schools. We wanted to allow the buses to arrive at elementary schools at or about the same time within a very short window, and also to have no elementary school ending later than 4 p.m. So those were our primary goals that we had going in. So now I'm going to walk you through each of these scenarios. The first is our current bell schedule, and we knew going into this that our current bell schedule would not continue to support the opening of BASA and the goals that we'd established for ourselves. But I wanted to put it here for you to have a reference to compare the others to so that you could see how the others compare. Some of the problems that we had with the current schedule is primarily found in the afternoon with elementary school. Their day was longer than they desired by a pretty good bit. There wasn't enough turnaround time for our buses to deliver middle and high school students to their homes and then get turned around and make it back to elementary schools on time. Sometimes there'd be as much as a 30-minute gap between buses arriving at elementary school or when the bell would ring at elementary school and when the last bus would come to pick up those elementary school students. And that was just unacceptable. And we would really prefer that that gap be no more than 15 minutes. We'd like the buses to be lined up when the bell rings so that we could load them and leave immediately. Another concern that we had is the difference in time that it takes the students to shuttle from the middle schools to the high school. Hammond Morris and Russell can shuttle to Appalachia and Windabero in about 10 minutes from the time the bell rings till they load up on the bus and go down the hill. Westside takes a good bit longer than that because there's a pretty long drive, and especially with construction and traffic, to get from Westside back to Appalachia. And so that was another issue that we were trying to address as best we could in some of these scenarios that we were looking at. That's not everything that was kind of not working well for us under the current bell schedule transportation plan, but that was some of the biggest ones. One of the things that we were thinking is that one option for us that might work would be a 3-tier system. We thought that that would sort of solve some of these pain points. And so that was one of the scenarios that we asked the consultant to look at. And so looking at a 3-tier system, once the results came back, we realized immediately that the 3-tier system did not really solve our problems for us, at least not in the near future. Maybe somewhere down the road, we'll be able to go to a 3-tier system that would be workable. But currently, there was no way possible, no matter what arrangement of schools on the tiers, could we get the buses turned around in the afternoon and back to the next tier school without pushing the end of school well later than we wanted it to be, without adding as many as 50 buses. And so there's, even if we had the money to add 50 buses, we couldn't possibly hire and train and get that many drivers ready to go. And the schedule just goes on for so long, we just didn't think that would be anything that would be tenable, and nobody on the committee felt like that was a good idea. But we did want to show it to you because we called ourselves the 3-tier study committee going into this thing because we thought that would be an option. but it doesn't really look like a viable option for us. The next two scenarios are actually two scenarios that are workable. Again, they're not without their own set of problems, but they are workable. We think there may still be some room to tinker with these and adjust these and modify them some. And that's one of the reasons we'd like to get some feedback from the community. So let me start with the one on this chart that's labeled with scenario B. So scenario B is a two-tier system. It is a two-tier system that actually flips the tiers from what we have now. It would put elementary school going first and middle and high school being on the second tier. The other unique feature about this particular scenario is that BASA students would have dedicated buses that they would ride in the morning. Now, it would normally, if we tried to do that with the middle high school tier, it would take about 18 buses to pull that off. But if we can run BASA buses at the same time we're running elementary school routes, then we can do some adjusting with our elementary school routes in order to reduce that number of buses, new buses that would be needed from 18 down to 8. And so we feel like it would be a workable solution in that regard. Now, in order for it to line up with high school schedules, BASA would have a longer day and it would be front loaded with that extra time. And then in their day would sort of extend on through the high school day, and they would shuttle to the high schools in the afternoon to ride home with the middle and high school students. So that's kind of how that would lay out. We've got a 7:30 a.m. Start time for elementary, a 7:30 start time for BASA. Middle and high schools would start at 8:30. And then if we move to the next column, you'll see the ending times there. Elementary 2, middle school at 3:10, high school at 3:35. The reason for the gap there is to allow time for the shuttles, the middle school to high school shuttle in the afternoon. And then BASA would end at 3:05. And again, that time is ending in time to get those students loaded on the buses and over to the high schools to be able to get on routes to take them home. And like I said, we think.
So Ken, can I ask a question about this?
Yes, ma'am.
If I'm reading this correctly, what we're saying is that BASA would start at 7:30, but basically they're going to have a 30-minute longer day, but that's basically for transportation?
Dale has been a part of this, and Dale has some other ideas of how he would use that extra time, but it is largely caused because of transportation needs. But we need to be able to allow BASA and high schools to overlap for 4 periods of the day. And Dale said that he'd rather have more time at BASA than less time at BASA. And so, yes, this would allow us to be able to pull that off and give BASA more time. And Dale's got some ideas of how to make good use of that time. You'll see when we get to the other scenario what the problems are if we're not able to do that.
I see the point, I really do, but I don't know what a good sell for parents it's going to be for BASA to be an hour longer school day than the rest of the schools. What do you guys think about that?
I think BASA is going to be so different and so great that parents will be fine.
Aren't going to care.
Yeah, and I'd like to,
Right,
Stephanie, I'd like to hear what Dale has to say about that too. What's he going to do with that time?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some questions. I mean, that's a long day to get there at 7:30 and not leave until 3:05. That's a really long day. I mean, it is. Right now, the middle school students get to school at 7:30 and they get out at 2:30. And you know, it's a long day. So I think it's just something that we need to understand.
And I agree with you. And you're going to find that there's not a single scenario. We've looked at 10, and these are the best 2 that's going to solve all of those problems. With BASA, it's either going to be a longer day or a shorter day or more buses than we can possibly hire drivers to drive. That's just the way that's going to work out. And so that's the reason we're looking for some additional input to figure out of the less than desirable options, which are the least painful.
Right.
I tell you,
would
the
think
one,
that the longer day would be better utilized where there was more children. That was kind of my thought, that it takes more time to shuffle more children. So maybe that was just kind of my initial thinking in the beginning when I thought, if somebody's got to have the longer day, maybe it would be better to give those schools with more population a little more time for transitioning and things like that. That was just my initial thought. But I'm with Dr. Huff. I would be interested to see what Dr. Simpson has to say about, his thoughts there.
Well, can we go ahead and look at C so we can, basically, Ken, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to be basically putting B and C on the table.
Yes, sir.
Okay, can we go ahead and look at C and then just try to compare the two?
And
Okay.
what's this other column that you have? Like it says 375.
Well, I've got the next to last column are some of the pros, some of the benefits of that particular scenario, according to the discussions that we've had in committee. And I can certainly walk you through those and speak to them a little bit more in depth. And then the very last column is some of the cons, some of the downfalls of that particular scenario, and I'll be glad to walk you through those two columns as well. In fact, I plan to do that. If you don't mind, I'll just kind of address that. Some of the advantages in scenario B is that it does account for the shuttles. The times, starting and ending times, allow for the shuttles to take place, both the middle to high school shuttle and the fourth period Sims and BASA students back to the high schools. It has dedicated bus routes for BASA students in the morning. We really like that. We think over time as BASA grows that having dedicated routes for that school is going to be something we need to begin to look at, because they'll start without all the high school grades. They'll start, I think, with 9th and 10th. Grades, but those grades are going to move up and they're going to add students. And so we need to look not just this next year, but a little bit longer term if we can. And so we really like the idea that we can get some dedicated BASA routes and sort of step our way into that. This scenario B has the elementary school day at 390 minutes, which is what they really prefer. They're currently at 420 minutes and they prefer to cut that back to 390. And it would allow that. And we believe that this schedule would allow the buses to arrive at all the elementary schools. And well, we know it would allow us to line up at all the elementary schools and load all those at the same time, do the turnaround, and then be able to return to the middle schools to be able to line up and be there at bell time. And so we think that solves that afternoon pain point that we had. And then the last sort of benefit that the group thought about is it allows elementary teachers would recoup some time for planning and professional learning time. Because what happens now, because the buses are not all staged and arrive at the school at bell time, is that there's a lot of supervision responsibility after the bell rings at the elementary school level. And so that just makes for a very difficult day for them. The big con is that it's a later desired dismissal time for the high school, and the west side is still going to be a problem with having a longer shuttle than the other two middle schools, the other three middle schools, because Bear Creek Middle is not shuttling at all. But we're still looking at that to see if we can come up with a different option. One con that's not here that Ms. Bramlett mentioned, and the reason it's not here is because Dale didn't think it was an issue, is that the BASA day will be longer than the traditional high school day. So if you consider that a negative, that'd be something you could add to the con column. The committee, especially given Dale's particular influence, did not list it here because Dale didn't think that'd be a negative for BASA students, but parents of BASA students may feel different than that. Moving on to the last scenario, we labeled it C in this chart just to kind of be able to have something to reference them. It also is a two-tier system. It is the most similar to the schedule that we have now. Because
we're not seeing that. Can you scroll to it?
Yeah, scroll.
Chris is in control. I'm going to let him scroll.
There it is.
There it is. Okay.
That's it. Okay. So it does still have middle and high school going in first, It has elementary school going in, well, actually has Bassa going in second, and it has elementary going in third. You'll notice some significant changes here. We did bump up the start time for middle and high school 10 minutes earlier to 7:20. We bumped the Bassa start time to 7:40. That's to allow a morning shuttle, because this particular scenario would have Bassa students riding to the high schools like the SIM students do now, shuttling over to Bassa in the morning. They would remain at Bassa all day. They would shuttle back in the afternoon. So their day would be significantly less than the high school, traditional high school day, because of the nature of those two shuttles on the morning and the afternoon. And so that's one of the difficulties with that particular scenario. The reason elementary is shifted later, you'll remember when I talked about some of the pain points we have with the current schedule and buses not being able to make the turnaround and line up at the elementary schools all at the same time. That, coupled with the desire for a shorter day, forced us to push elementary, if they're going to be on tier 2, later in the day to make that work. So we've got them starting at 9 and ending at 3:45. Now, one thing I'll say about both scenarios is that we can adjust the starting and ending times slightly as long as we do it relative to one another. In other words, as long as we move the starting and ending times for all schools one way or the other, it still holds true, but we can't just move one start time without moving the end time. So there's some flexibility on the particulars of the starting times. We adjusted them the way we did to try to stay inside that 4 p.m. Dismissal window. One thing I'll say about this is in the column that I would say how many buses are needed. This scenario can be done possibly with no additional buses and drivers outside of just numbers we may need for growth. But budget-wise, this is probably the more expensive scenario, and let me explain why, because it's a little tricky. You'll notice the gap between middle and high school start time and elementary school start time. Currently, we have an hour gap between those, and that's about as much time as it would take to turn around and run those routes. By shifting these times to solve the afternoon problem, we create a bigger gap in the morning, which means that we potentially could be creating 40 minutes worth of time, additional time for bus drivers. And so if we take that 40 minutes and add it all up per the number of bus drivers and multiply it out over the course of the year, this scenario C could potentially cost $45,000 more per year than adding 8 additional buses and drivers. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you see a 0 in that additional bus column, that doesn't mean it's that much cheaper. It's actually potentially more expensive, and it's hard to nail down those numbers yet. We'll continue to work on that and may have a better estimate for you moving into the work session at the end of May. But I did want you to know that that one may be a little more expensive.
Can I say something?
I'm sorry.
Can I say something?
Yes, yes.
I think what we did this study in October, and I think all the data and all the discussion points revolve around how things were in October. And my concern as a board member, as a community member, is we're going through unprecedented times. And as a school board, I think it's important to have the least impact on the community that we possibly can. And my concern with flipping, like B is we're really messing with people and their schedules right now. And we've got a lot of high school students, I believe, and you guys can correct me, that have to work and their families depend on them working. I just think, it's my opinion, that it's a real mistake to flip things around in these really turbulent, unprecedented times that we're in. And we're not talking about the impact on COVID at all and what it's going to do to our students, our families. So I think we need to try to keep it as close to what we're doing now. That's my opinion.
Right. And I don't disagree with you. The difficulty is we've got some really serious pain points. But this scenario that we're talking about right here is as close to what we have now as it can be, and still trying to eliminate some of those pretty significant pain points that we have.
Ken, the cost of scenario C, you said that was 45,000 per year greater than scenario B.
Please take that as a rough estimate, but yes, we think that that is potentially that would be a cost difference between those two.
Would be because you're adding 8 additional buses and drivers.
Yes, because a larger number of drivers get more time. So about 40 minutes additional per day for about 100 plus drivers every day for 176 days. And when you multiply that all up, then that is that would come to a greater amount than adding 8 additional drivers.
I see. Okay.
In all honesty, I didn't think that would be true until I started putting pencil to paper and actually doing the math, and then I realized that it was. And so I wanted to.
Well, let's face it, $45,000 over the course of a school year is not a lot of money. And
No, that's not.
Our expenses right now, our gas and things like that, will probably offset the 45,000.
Yeah, and that's nothing. That's nothing. That's not a lot of money considering what we spend on transportation.
Yes.
Period.
But let's go back.
Closest to what we have now, from what I see, right? C is the closest to what we have right now, as
Yes,
far as
except
not
for some
missing.
pretty significant time changes for elementary. Yes, it's pretty much the same as what we have now with some
But
adjustment.
as far as Bill's talking about, like with high schoolers having to go to work and those types of things, C is probably the most accommodating. However, our elementary school teachers are going to have a small hissy fit when they find out that the kids don't come to school till 9 o'clock.
Well,
They want them to come first.
But let's look at,
Trouble.
It affects the elementary school parents 9 o'clock. You know,
the work.
think about
Yes.
that too.
Well, right now, school doesn't start until 8:30 there. So most parents that have to be at work, they're probably already utilizing before care, I would presume,
Yeah.
with the school not starting until 8:30. So I wouldn't think that would be quite
Right.
as big of a deal. But from what I'm hearing, and I'm just making sure I understand, we have no choice but to change, because now that we've added BASA to the mix, we simply have no choice. We have to make some kind of changes, right?
There's going to have to be some changes made. The current schedule that we had a lot of really significant pain points, especially for elementary school, but also for the opening BASA on that schedule greatly reduces the amount of minutes in a day for those students. If you'll look in that middle column, you'll notice that BASA has the least amount of minutes according to scenario C, and that's about what they would have in the current, if we already had it opened and they were in the same schedule that we have now, 375. And speaking to Dale, he's got some pretty significant concerns about a day that short.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm sure.
let me ask a question on the other one. How many total hours are we talking? Well, we're talking 375, 455. And I guess my concern is if you go into the BASA form and just from taking classes like that, in colleges, when a lot of us didn't even get those kind of things until college. And if you start looking into those kinds of things and not as a regular student, because like I said, a lot of us didn't have the privilege of getting those kind of things until college. But it's not like a regular high school student. But when you go into the arts and those things, you're not really, when you go into a science class, and now we did have science, but an experiment takes a lot longer, where a regular teacher can cut the class off at a certain time. But it takes a lot longer when you're getting into there and you start cutting the school day by that much. It cuts that curriculum drastically of what you can offer those students. So I think we're educators first. And yes, I think with the COVID, 19 has drastically in all areas put everything, but we've got to think as educators first.
Sure, but we also have to remember that Bassett is a choice school.
That's right.
Mhm.
If we create a situation where it's difficult for parents to
Right.
send their kids there because the day's too
Right.
long or because it's not as,
Right.
we have to consider that. We don't want a situation where people say, well, I can't do that. It doesn't work.
Right.
So,
Right.
hey,
We got to
quick
look at
question.
all of it.
When it comes to Bassett, just backing up to B, with the issue really being transportation, would it be feasible? I'm totally just shooting off the hip here, so y'all can be like, 70, that's not reality. But so say we had to start at 7:30, would it be feasible to say that maybe like the buses got there at 7:30 and the first 30 minutes or whatever was study hall and the actual class didn't start until 8? So like if you were a car rider or a driver or something, to put it a little bit more equivalent with the regular high school, is that a thing? Could we do something like that, or is that not okay?
Well, if you're talking specifically about scenario B, the reason the start time for Bassett is the same as elementary is because we're basically using some of the adjusted elementary routes to be able to use buses that have to turn around and get to the middle high school routes. So we need to have we could probably adjust a little bit, Ms. Bramlett. And certainly Dale is planning to use that early time as a 0 period, and they're going to do special projects and those kinds of things there. But we need the buses to turn around and go back and pick up middle and high school students and get them to school by 8:30.
Right. So would it be okay to say that the doors open at 7:30 and all the bus kids are there by then? But then if you're a driver, since it's high school, that the actual school doesn't start until 8? See what I'm saying? Would it be possible to do something like that just to make it a little bit better on paper? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And that is certainly something that is doable within this plan.
Yeah.
That's obviously a new idea that I haven't talked to Dale about, but it's doable within the transportation plan.
I'm just trying to think of maybe a way to make a little bit more continuity between the high schools looking so that it doesn't look to a student who we're trying to say, hey, let's go to Bassett, that, oh, you're going to go to school for an hour longer every day. Because while, to us and as educators, hey, I think it's great. As a mom, I think it's great. But to a kid, maybe not so much, or to another parent. And I very much agree with what Bill is saying, that I do think that it's important for us to, be conscientious of the fact that there's some major changes happening in families, and we have to think about that. I mean, we're dealing with their livelihood, so we need to think about that. But this is great. I know this took a lot of work, and great job, because I'm stressed out just looking at this part. So I can't imagine your job. So thank you.
That last point, the point that you and Bill are making, is one of the reasons we wanted to make sure that we included a scenario like scenario C.
Sure.
Because it's important that folks see what it would look like to stay as similar to what we have now as possible.
Ken, sorry to interrupt your train of thought, but while y'all were, I was just texting with Dale just to get kind of his scale on it. Basically, with the Longhorn, he says that the periods would be shorter at Bassett and Sims due to having to be on the same schedule for the high schools, where the transportation is. So they'd be 70 minutes versus the regular 90. So his plan for the extra time would be an additional period for each block Monday through Thursday to make up that time, and then a remediation enrichment period, kind of like what you were talking about, Ms. Bramlett, on Friday. But he's also open to, the beauty of the whole Basso piece is it's flexible. There's some flexibility there. We're a charter. It's and we can definitely, I think that's a great idea to take a look at that. Have, so I think we're wide open as far as that goes.
Have we talked to the high school principals? Have we run these scenarios by?
Yeah.
We had a assistant principal from each of the 2 high schools that were on the committee, and they were given guidance that they could feel free to go back and talk it over with the administration at their schools. So Jared Noblet and Angie Boyd were on the committee and were in the conference calls when we were discussing this. And then I know for a fact that they've had discussions back at their high school with the staff. I will just tell you that among the committee, high school folks had one scenario that they preferred and elementary had another that they preferred. I'd rather not tell you which is which at this point.
I don't think you have to tell us which is
I don't
which.
think you do either.
Yeah, that's another reason we're coming to you and to the, and hopefully you will agree and put them on the table and we can get community input, because there was some pretty sharp division among which scenario was going to fit the most needs.
Well,
What about,
And
what about,
to that point,
what
Ken,
about
to that point,
extracurricular activities?
if we put, this is just Ricky's opinion. If we put a survey out there, who gets to the survey the most times, who answers it most, is going to skew this thing.
Well, actually,
For me, if we look at B and C, C has so many quote unquote drawbacks or issues with it, and B doesn't have as many. And Bill, I hear what you're saying about upsetting the community, but first of all, we have got to do what's best for the students in our system.
I don't know that this is best. I don't know that that's best for the students, Ricky. I mean, why do you think that's
We
better for the
we just have to disagree with that.
Well,
Sign,
again,
Okay,
this
hold
is
on.
a choice high school, and they make, they're gonna make a choice. I think we do have to put it out there, and I think we do need to let them make the choices and I think we need to hear them. We need to hear what they feel, but I don't think that we need to say, because there's a few of us that think that, because of that, I think that we need to hear what they have to say, but it is a choice high school. And just like they had to make a choice, whether they wanted to play a sport or whether they didn't want to make a sport, you're going to have to make choices in life, and hard choices. And this is going to have to be a choice of whether you want to make that, and a lot of these kids that are into the arts and stuff are into
One
that
thing,
as well.
one thing, Beverly, about this choice, we keep saying it's a choice, and certainly it is, but those choices were made before this transportation issue
Yes,
has arisen. like it has.
exactly.
So
Well,
it really
Okay.
Just to refocus a little
Transportation
bit.
was going to be an issue all along.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
we need to look at long-term goals, though. I'm worried that we're focused on the short term of just, I understand that we're in a crazy time right now and we're trying to keep the society sane by not making too big of a change. And I'm not sure which way I'm leaning just yet. So I'm not leaning either way. But I think not only what's best for next year, but then looking forward the year after and the year after that, which one of these schedules supports growth for VASA and all of our schools, and really look at a schedule with a long-term view versus just next year.
and I'll just say this, and this is something, I went through this school system, be it many years ago, but scenario B for middle, elementary, and high school was what we did forever and a day. We did this for a long, long time. This flip that we have now is relatively new for Broward County schools.
Mm-hmm.
I
Okay,
actually looked that up, Mr. Bailey. We actually
You
flipped
remember
for the
why we-
2012,
why it was
2013 school year. The board on May 1st, 2012 voted for the flip. I've been,
Yeah.
dealing with that ever since.
Yeah,
Hey,
Yeah,
can I
and the
say
reason
something
was
now?
because of the parents, correct? To those of you who've been here for a long time, the reason for this flip was mainly because of the parents, because they wanted the older children to get out first, correct? To help with childcare and things like that. Is that correct?
that was
No,
one of
ma'am,
the
it was
reasons.
No, ma'am.
Yeah,
What
that was one of the reasons
That was
given.
one of the reasons.
It was due to funding.
Stephanie,
Funding, okay.
Yeah, it was a
Yes, we
funding
did it.
issue.
yeah, it was a funding issue, and it was also, the other reason is that parents wanted their kids to be able to participate in sports. High
Sure.
school wanted the kids to be able to be on pretty much the same schedule as everybody else, but obviously the other school systems have changed already. I have three things to say about this for you to consider, because I know we're talking transportation, but at the end of the day, we're talking education and safety for these children.
Safety.
3 years ago, we had a huge discussion. A lot of research was done on the fact that when you have kids going to high school that early in the morning, because of their sleep patterns and rhythms and science and all of these studies that have been done, that they stand a better chance if they're not on a bus of being involved in an accident. Okay, so safety should be our first concern. The second concern should be the fact that at the end of the day, we need to do what's right for educating these kids. Transportation is a piece of that. The third thing we need to consider is the fact that, and Bill, I know what you're saying, and it's going to be a long time before we really know all of the fallout from this, but it's painful to do something now a little bit and then have to come back next year and say, we got to do more this year. It's like, you know, picking at a scab on a wound. The best thing you can do is make a decision as to what's best for the students, and then go with that. And everybody's expecting some upheaval. Everybody's expecting that there's going to be some changes, and we just have to go ahead and do it. And I'm basing that on previous scenarios that we've had in the school system.
Well, one
and I would
thing-
ask you to think
Agree,
about
but
that.
the early start time argument is going to be hard for us to argue when we have one of our high schools starting at the same time as the elementary schools. We're not, that's
But
gonna
again,
be-
Stephanie, if BASA says get them there at 7:30, but they're going to have free time, and that if parents are driving these kids to school, which many of them will do, then that's going to negate
Yes,
some of that.
for
What
sure.
I would really like to hear is from Dale, if he can come to the board meeting, maybe,
Sure.
Chris,
Yeah, we can
and
definitely do
just tell us what his plans are so we can get a better handle on how this is going to work.
Right,
That-
and to your point, exactly, with the kids driving early and all that stuff, that way we're saying the kids who are driving to BASA, they don't have to be there at 7:30 in the morning. This is a bus transportation thing. So I think that that'll be a way for us to get ahead of that, you know, and to make sure that we're being, you know, faithful to our argument, so to speak. Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. And I'm all for surveys, because we need to be able to say we did ask questions and we
Right.
looked at that, and we need to look at their input. But at the-
Especially the teachers. We need to know
But
what
at
they
the-
think.
Well,
At the end of the day, this is why we get the big bucks. Okay. It is a board decision. So let's think
Lynn,
about this, have Dale come and talk to us next week, and then we can make a
We'll do
decision.
that. And
I have-
also, yeah, go ahead, Dr. Huff.
Can I say one thing? Lynn, when we had the very difficult discussions about 3 years ago about changing from our current start time to flipping to high schools and the elementary school, we had a long discussion about that and trying to decide what was best for the children. At the end of the day, I think we did decide what was best for the children, and that reflects scenario C a lot more than it does B. One of the things that was discussed then, and I still feel is important, we talk about safety, and safety, we are educators, but we really, our number one job is safety. That's our number one job, is keep the kids safe and secure. And one thing about an early start time for elementary schools that bothered me, and I think Lynn and I disagreed about this 3 years ago, was that I was concerned about elementary schools being out waiting on buses in the dark, and that bothered me. It still bothers me. And I have a problem with that. And so I know kids in high school need more sleep than other kids. And I know we've been through that, and the data's there, and I trust that the science is behind that. But however, the kids that are early elementary kids out in the dark waiting on a bus, however, it's never happened. It still bothers me that we're putting those kids at risk. And some of them are out there by themselves or not, or with older children that are supposed to be watching them. And that bothers me a lot. So I prefer that the elementary school kids not wait in the dark, if at all possible, during the wintertime. I'll say that. And that's why we really push towards scenario C, really strong. It was very divisive to time for us all then. And so I understand both sides. But we ended up last time at scenario C as being the best choice. I'm with Bill. I think it's a tough time to make changes. It's going to be hard. Parents and children are going through times that they've never experienced, that nobody's ever experienced. We don't know what's going to happen.
We don't even
But
know
we
what school's gonna look like come.
But we don't know, and we
You're
don't.
very, very right about that.
We don't have a clue what's going to happen. We don't have a clue. And for us to make a change right now, I think is going to be just adding more stress to families and students that are already stressed to the hilt. So I'll shut up and leave that alone, but that's the way I feel about it.
And I
Well,
can,
to that point, I would remind you, Dr. Huff, that when we looked at this and the scenario with the children came up and elementary school children being out there waiting for buses, our bus routes are designed now so that we pick up kids in neighborhoods where they're all there together to get on those buses.
Yeah.
And so that eliminates some of that problem.
Well, we
Well,
also,
and the other
actually now we pick up most of them according to the consultant, and Ken, tell me if I'm wrong, but what I saw in there is we're picking up most of them at the doorstops.
Yeah, over the
around their
years,
houses.
Going back to a couple of years, we had consolidated a lot of that and just drift is what I call it, over time. Those routes kind of stops get added. And so we've got a lot more that are getting picked up door side. One of the things that we plan to do over the course of this coming year is to do some efficiency studies and get back closer to what Ms. Stevens is talking about, where there's group neighborhood type pickups.
Right.
But we kind of wandered from that a little bit from what we put in place a few years ago. And
But God,
How
this is
long
just, for me,
student on
me,
the
if you
bus
look at-
with either of these scenarios? Do we know that, Ken?
I'm
How
sorry,
long-
Dr.
The
Huff.
longest time a student may have to be on one of these buses?
Well, some students would be on there very little, and then there could be some that would be on the bus for an hour or so.
Okay. So not much worse. than it
Dr.
is.
Huff, Dr. Huff, I can tell you, I wasn't on the board when y'all did this, but my kids were under it, and I can see yours. My kids went out there when they were little, and it was dark, and there was times it was raining, and that was our concern. But I can tell you, when the start times were back under the old time, there would be a parent that maybe didn't work or worked from home or whatever that would stand out there when it was dark or it was raining or whatever and make sure all the kids, and in fact, I know that transportation was very good to work with those and say, okay, well, we'll make the bus stop right there where we know that there's a parent that can stay there and watch those kids and make sure they get on the bus.
and if you look, and for me, if you look at scenario C, as far as the start time, you're gonna have middle school and high school starting at 7:20 and elementary at 9 o'clock. So you have a lot of kids at home by themselves. Could be possibly at home by themselves for a long period of time, over an hour.
Only middle school and high school students. The elementary students would be last.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. The elementary would be at home by themselves.
Not on C,
Some
they wouldn't.
scenarios.
Well, if you
On C, they
do
wouldn't
B
get home
now,
until 3:45.
Ricky, if you do.
I
if you
believe,
do-
I believe what you're saying is true.
A winner.
And if we go back to the old days, like you're talking about, I recall that if you are starting school at 7:30, a lot of parents can drop off at the school that way before they go to work, like I did back in the old days. I was able to drop off with my car on the way to work. So I think that that's another issue that we would be thinking about as well.
Yeah, and along that line, though, talking about what Ricky's talking about, kids being alone, I think elementary kids will be more likely to be alone under scenario B when they get home early. And
I was speaking of it in the morning, Dr. Huff.
In the morning,
Yeah.
if we're talking in the morning, then they would be subject to having to go to be daycare, in the mornings.
Remember, we have before school care and after school care.
Yeah, I know that.
And it would be what they're doing right now.
That's what they're doing now.
Yeah, that's what they're doing now.
Have we forgotten that it could be a financial burden on some of our parents as well, too? So there's lots of options that we haven't considered or have we talked about, but that's just another thing that we have to consider as well.
Yeah, this is a tough one. We like you said, y'all have said, we've been through some of this before as far as the time swaps. And it usually comes out close to 50-50 from what we hear back, to be honest. As far as
Sure.
parents and the community goes, it usually splits pretty much down the middle. So it's not going to be an easy one to navigate. The unfortunate piece is we have to make one of the two changes. And I do not disagree with Bill at all as far as the timing of this is not at all good. It couldn't be worse, to be perfectly honest. But we also do have to look at the long term. So, I'm kind of split right now too. I'm still digesting everything, but we wanted to get it out to you all and get it out so our community can kind of start weighing in and we can hear. I don't really think we'll do a survey, so to speak, because surveys tend to be, okay, what was the vote? But we're going to open up, just take comments, more or less.
Yeah, I agree with that too, Chris. Surveys in this situation, people do a survey and they look at the results and they think, well, this is the way you're
Yeah,
doing it.
you had two more on this one, so we're going with that one. That's not the way.
Yeah, and that's
If I might jump in, what we plan to do is, if you put this on the table for review, is take those two scenarios and the goals that are at the top and get that out to public review with the form where they basically tell us what they like or dislike about the two scenarios. So we're not getting a vote per se, but we're getting specific ideas of things that work and don't work. And then what we plan to do is the committee will meet again before the May work session. We'll try to make sense of whatever feedback we get and make adjustments where we can. And then at the work session, we'll share that with you in preparation for hopefully by the June regular board meeting, you'll be ready to make a decision because we're running out of time planning for next year. We need to go ahead and try to get something done by June 2nd at the latest. But we will take that feedback and try to make adjustments as best we can to make either of these two scenarios more palatable based on what we're hearing from feedback. And that's all I have.
Okay, so can we say this? Next Tuesday, let's talk to Dale Simpson about this and see what his thoughts are. That'll give us time to digest these and think about where we want to go with this. And then what we'll do Tuesday is put this out for public input.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That's what we want to do. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we move on to the next item now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good
Joe.
job. Good job on that, Ken, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Huff.
You and the committee have done an amazing job pulling all that together. It's been a tough one, I know.
So now, Joe, you get to talk about custodial supplies and equipment service requests.
Can you let him in? He's coming. He's having a little bit of. Joe, you there, Joe? There he is. His audio is taking a second.
Tell him I promise this won't take as long as the last one.
Can you hear me?
There you go.
Yes, there you go.
Sorry, I froze up there and it went away.
All right.
Okay.
Custodial
yes,
supplies
we're
and
recommending.
equipment service.
Yes, ma'am. We're recommending, we're asking the superintendent to recommend Athens Janitor Supply for our custodial supplies and equipment service support. We had two firms that responded to our request for proposal, and these are two excellent firms, workhorses really in this industry, particularly in the North Georgia area. And we would be well served with either of them. And really what this came down to for us is just the fact that we have worked with Athens Janitor Supply as our distributor for the last 3.5 years. They've done a fine job, and their overall cost is slightly lower as well. So those are really the 2 points of separation between these two firms.
All right, so the superintendent's going to recommend Athens Janitor Supply, and can we put that on the consent agenda?
Yeah.
Anybody opposed to it? Anybody have any comments about it? Okay, so we'll put that on the consent agenda also. All right. Authorization for committees to meet. Uh, Probably not happening.
Good luck.
We can authorize it, you know, just.
Our,
in case.
our school lunch committee is meeting on Monday via Zoom.
Yeah, that's true. So we'll do an
Okay.
authorization for committee to meet.
I will say,
Um,
Lynn, I will say that the Teacher of the Year Committee has, I don't know if anybody knows this yet or not, but we have abandoned any ideas of trying to select a Teacher of the Year for this year, and we're following guidelines that the state of Georgia DOE has established concerning this. And we'll basically be honoring our, Chris can explain it better than me, but we're basically going to be honoring our Teachers of the Year, each school Teachers of the Year this year. And from that group, be picking someone next spring for the next year's Teacher of the Year. Is that correct, Chris? That's more or
Yes,
less.
sir. Yeah, that's, you nailed it. It's, the state is basically just going to keep their Teacher of the Year that they have now for the state through the next year. And that's basically kind of what we're doing. But we're going to be pulling from the ones that, since we already have our school levels, and we'll be pulling from them so that they won't miss a chance at it, but it'll be a year delayed.
Right.
Yep.
Correct.
You
So
got it.
just to let everybody know, that's where we stand with the Teacher of the Year Committee. It's currently in limbo, and we won't pick up and meet again until next spring.
Okay. So do we need to go into executive session tonight, Chris?
Yes, ma'am. We have some personnel to look over.
Okay, then the next item on the agenda is executive session. We'll need a vote to discuss or deliberate upon the appointment, employment, compensation, hiring, disciplinary action or dismissal, or periodic evaluation or rating of a public officer or employee, or to interview applicants for the position of superintendent. Would everybody please, by show of hands, raise your hand to go into executive session? Very good. We're going into executive session.
All right, give us just a minute to cut the live feed and then we'll get started.
Thank you.